A multitude of significant events have unfolded across the globe recently, demanding our attention. Today, we delve deep into one of the most impactful ongoing situations, the complex and ever-evolving economic standoff between the United States and China. Stay with us as we unpack the latest developments and explore the potential long-term consequences, with detailed conclusions coming at the very end of our analysis. Good morning. The economic tensions between the world's two largest economies are intensifying. Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods are set to experience a dramatic increase, surging from the current 34% mark to a staggering 84%, effective starting tomorrow. This sharp escalation marks a significant new phase in the ongoing trade dispute. Beijing's Ministry of Commerce has reacted strongly, accusing the Trump administration of employing tactics akin to blackmail. They characterize the imposed tariffs not as legitimate trade measures, but as a typical display of unilateral bullying practices, a move that disregards established international trade norms and dialogue. This rhetoric underscores the deep-seated friction and mistrust fueling the conflict. The battle for global supremacy, particularly economic dominance, between the United States and the People's Republic of China is no longer confined to closed-door diplomatic discussions or abstract ideological debates. It is actively unfolding in real time, its tremors felt across global financial markets, vital shipping routes, and the very fabric of international economic policies. This is not merely a theoretical disagreement. It is a tangible struggle with immediate and far-reaching consequences for businesses and consumers worldwide. Make sure to watch this video until the end, as we will be summarizing the key takeaways and offering our conclusions on this critical global issue. The ripple effects of this high-stakes confrontation are cascading throughout the global economy, impacting diverse sectors and populations. From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the quiet main streets of rural towns, the consequences are being felt. Technology giants and agricultural communities alike are navigating the turbulent waters created by these trade tensions. At the epicenter of this high-stakes conflict stand two powerful and determined leaders, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. Each is employing every tool available in their respective arsenals: tariffs, trade restrictions, diplomatic pressure, and strategic investments, in a determined effort to reshape the existing global order to better suit their nation's perceived advantages and strategic interests. Their actions are not isolated maneuvers, but calculated steps in a larger geopolitical chess game with the potential to redefine international relations for decades to come. President Trump, speaking at a Republican dinner event just last night, painted a picture of international desperation, claiming that dozens of countries are urgently contacting the U.S., practically begging for a trade deal. He asserted, with characteristic confidence, that these nations are eager to avoid being subjected to tariffs themselves. This portrayal suggests a U.S. strategy of leveraging economic pressure to force concessions and secure favorable agreements. They are, in his words, dying to make a deal. He emphasized the simplicity of the situation. Either countries negotiate deals beneficial to the U.S., or they face the economic consequences of tariffs on their goods entering the American market. He framed this approach as straightforward, making deals while ensuring that those who resist contribute through tariffs. This narrative highlights a transactional approach to international trade, prioritizing bilateral agreements over multilateral frameworks and using tariffs as a primary tool of enforcement and negotiation leverage. In this increasingly tense and unpredictable environment, global financial markets are experiencing significant turbulence, swinging wildly in response to each new development and announcement. Uncertainty and volatility have, unfortunately, become the defining characteristics of the current economic landscape, the new normal that investors and businesses must navigate. Reflecting this instability, a senior executive from BlackRock, recognized as the world's largest asset manager overseeing assets exceeding $11 trillion, described the present moment as deeply unstable. This assessment from such a major financial player underscores the gravity of the situation. The executive pointed specifically to the profound uncertainty surrounding the future trajectory of tariffs, how high they might go, and, crucially, how long these elevated rates will remain in place. This lack of clarity creates significant headwinds for investment planning and economic forecasting globally. Markets may exhibit fleeting moments of optimism, showing brief signs of hope and tilting green on certain trading days, perhaps driven by rumors of negotiation progress or positive economic data points elsewhere. However, the underlying sentiment remains overwhelmingly fragile. Any positive movement is often quickly overshadowed by the next tariff threat or retaliatory action, keeping investors on edge. This inherent fragility was shaken once again today, with a major announcement from China's Ministry of Finance. In a significant escalation, Beijing declared it would raise tariffs on essentially all U.S. goods currently subject to duties, increasing the rates from the existing average of 34% to a truly staggering 84%. This move represents a clear and heavy blow aimed directly at any American business attempting to sell its products into one of the world's largest and most crucial consumer markets. The sheer scale of this increase sends a powerful message of retaliation and resolve. This decision was explicitly made as a direct response to President Trump's recent increase in tariffs levied on Chinese imports entering the United States, which themselves now stand at a minimum level of 104% according to some analyses. China's action has sent yet another powerful shockwave reverberating through already jittery global financial markets. The immediate reaction was evident as U.S. stock index futures dropped sharply upon the news. Similarly, Germany's DAX index also experienced a steep decline, serving as a stark reflection of just how deeply interconnected the modern global economy has become, and how acutely sensitive international markets are to these headline-grabbing shifts in trade policy between the two economic superpowers. This isn't just an abstract number adjusted on a government ledger. It is a massive policy shift with serious, tangible, real-world consequences that will be felt far beyond the immediate trading relationship. Every single American company conducting business in China, spanning the spectrum from consumer goods manufacturers to heavy industrial manufacturing firms, is now confronting a dramatically tougher and more challenging economic environment. The newly announced 84% tariffs will inevitably increase operational costs significantly, severely limit potential sales volumes within the lucrative Chinese market, and almost certainly lead to lower profit margins for these businesses. The economic pressure is mounting considerably. Simultaneously, Beijing has officially confirmed its intention to take the Trump administration's tariff actions to the World Trade Organization, WTO, seeking adjudication through established international trade dispute mechanisms. Furthermore, Chinese officials have strongly hinted that additional retaliatory measures could be forthcoming if the trade conflict continues to escalate. We often forget, amidst the economic figures and political posturing, that leaders like Chinese President Xi Jinping, while not subject to democratic elections in the Western sense, and perhaps not worried about their next re-election campaign, are deeply concerned about their legitimacy and historical legacy within their own country and party structures. From this perspective, Donald Trump's aggressive tariff strategy has arguably put President Xi in a difficult corner, forcing a strong response to maintain credibility. As noted by observers, China is now girding for a protracted fight, signaling a commitment to withstand the economic pressure and push back against perceived American unilateralism. What's more, adding another layer of complexity and potential disruption, China has recently added 6 specific U.S. entities to its unreliable entity list, and another 12 to its export control list. These actions represent a further deliberate escalation of the ongoing trade situation. While these designations might sound like bureaucratic maneuvers, they carry serious practical implications for the targeted companies. Being added to these lists means that the affected U.S. firms can face significant restrictions, or even be outright banned, from trading with Chinese companies and accessing the Chinese market. Typically, such measures target businesses involved in trade related to sensitive areas, such as those concerning Taiwan, Hong Kong, or technologies deemed politically or strategically contentious by Beijing. In some instances, individuals connected to these designated companies could also face sanctions imposed by the Chinese government, including travel restrictions or asset freezes. This targeted approach demonstrates China's willingness to use non-tariff barriers and regulatory tools as leverage in the trade dispute. China is acutely aware that it cannot perfectly match U.S. tariffs on a dollar-for-dollar basis, simply due to the existing trade imbalance. Significantly more Chinese goods flow into the U.S. than American goods go to China. However, Beijing possesses other potent levers it can pull to exert pressure. One of the most significant of these alternative levers is agriculture, a sector that was already hit hard during previous rounds of tariff exchanges. If the Chinese government decides to once again target U.S. agricultural products, a possibility hinted at by state-controlled media outlets, it would directly impact a key component of President Trump's political base residing in rural America. Such a move would not only inflict economic pain, but also reinforce the perception that this trade war is not merely an economic dispute, but also carries personal and political dimensions. Simultaneously, China is strategically attempting to turn this crisis into an opportunity for geopolitical realignment. In recent high-level meetings, President Xi Jinping has explicitly stated that China will actively expand trade relationships with neighboring countries, particularly focusing on strengthening ties within Southeast Asia. This initiative includes nations like Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, countries that have themselves been caught in the crossfire of U.S. tariffs and have experienced rising costs and reduced access to the American market. Consequently, China's outreach, offering alternative trade partnerships and market access, becomes increasingly attractive to these nations seeking to diversify their economic dependencies. By deliberately strengthening these regional ties, China aims to cushion the economic blow from reduced trade with the United States and, perhaps more strategically, begin to reshape regional and global supply chains to be less reliant on Western markets in the long term. This represents a significant strategic pivot with potentially lasting implications for global trade patterns. Meanwhile, Chinese state media has adopted a notably more assertive and defiant tone. Editorials and commentaries are mocking what they portray as other countries begging the United States for tariff exemptions, framing the U.S. approach as divisive and unreliable. From Beijing's official viewpoint, President Trump's strategy appears to be centered on picking off countries individually, forcing them into bilateral deals that favor American interests rather than adhering to established multilateral trade frameworks like the WTO. China, in contrast, consistently positions itself as a steadfast supporter of global rules-based trade, a message carefully crafted to resonate with developing nations feeling squeezed by perceived U.S. protectionism and unilateral actions. All of this is unfolding within an economic environment already fraught with significant uncertainty. Global companies that depend on intricate cross-border supply chains are feeling the heat intensely. Consider the example of Boeing's 737 aircraft. Each plane is a complex assembly comprising approximately 2,000 distinct parts, sourced from a network of 700 suppliers spread across the globe. The wings might come from Japan, the fuselage constructed in Italy, some doors manufactured in Canada, while the sophisticated engines are supplied by Britain's Rolls-Royce. The notion of reshoring all this intricate production back to the U.S., as sometimes suggested by the Trump administration, is a monumental undertaking that would realistically take many years and cost billions upon billions of dollars, disrupting established efficiencies and likely increasing final product costs substantially. In the immediate term, higher tariffs simply translate into a higher cost of doing business across numerous sectors. Companies like the European airline Ryanair, which has dozens of Boeing aircraft currently on order, could now face substantial additional import fees potentially totaling over £400 million. These increased costs incurred by the airlines are unlikely to be absorbed entirely. Instead, they will inevitably be passed on to consumers in the form of higher air travel prices, affecting tourism and business travel. And the impact extends far beyond just the aviation industry. The ripple effects touch nearly everything consumers buy, from essential smartphones and televisions to automobiles and everyday clothing. These are fundamentally global industries, built upon decades of integrated international trade networks. Attempting to unravel these complex systems overnight, or even over a few years, is not only incredibly difficult, but according to many economists, quite simply impractical without causing major economic disruption and widespread price increases for end consumers. As this pervasive uncertainty spreads, businesses are hitting the pause button. Major investment decisions are being shelved, new projects and expansions are being delayed, and companies are becoming hesitant to hire. People are less willing to switch jobs in an uncertain market, factories are delaying expansion plans, and overall hiring slows down. According to major financial institutions like BlackRock and other respected financial observers, this growing hesitancy and paralysis in investment and hiring is the real underlying threat stemming from the trade war. Economies thrive on momentum and confidence. Without it, stagnation inevitably sets in, leading to much longer-term negative consequences that extend far beyond the immediate impact reflected in daily market charts or government press releases. The slowdown in investment today can mean reduced productivity and competitiveness tomorrow. Behind all of the tariff policies, market crashes, and official press conferences, there are real families, dedicated workers, and struggling business owners trying desperately to navigate a global landscape that feels increasingly uncertain and precarious. In communities across America, from Virginia to the industrial Midwest and agricultural heartlands, there is palpable and growing anxiety. Many individuals initially supported Donald Trump, hoping his aggressive stance on trade would revitalize American industry, protect domestic jobs, and exert necessary pressure on countries like China to engage in fairer trade practices. But for now, the most immediate and tangible results for many have been rising costs for everyday goods, increased volatility in financial markets, impacting savings and retirement funds, and a pervasive sense of economic fragility that affects decisions from household budgets to business expansion plans. Consider the experiences shared by ordinary Americans. Gabriel, a nurse and mother of a 2-year-old, recently spoke about needing to take on extra shifts just to make ends meet, citing the rising prices of essentials, particularly baby goods and household items. Many of these products are imported from Asia and Europe, and now carry the additional burden of tariffs or increased shipping costs resulting from the trade conflict. For families already operating on tight budgets, this pinch is acutely real and impactful. Then there's Jim, a construction worker, who observes that he's watched the cost of essential raw materials, like timber and steel, rise dramatically, even before the latest rounds of tariffs took full effect. He notes that everything from basic lumber to fixtures and fittings now costs more, making construction projects significantly more expensive and harder to deliver on time and within budget. While Jim expresses hope that prices will eventually stabilize in the long run and still believes in the president's overall plan, he readily admits that the current price hikes are directly affecting his work, his customers, and the viability of projects in his community. These are not isolated stories. They represent the lived reality for many workers caught in the middle of this global economic struggle. Beyond these anecdotal accounts, the broader economic indicators paint a sobering picture. Stock markets have reacted sharply and negatively to nearly every announcement of new tariffs or retaliatory measures, reflecting widespread investor nervousness. Pensions, retirement accounts, and personal savings invested in the market have taken significant hits as confidence erodes. Investors are demonstrably nervous, business leaders are expressing caution and delaying investments, and consumers, especially those nearing retirement or on fixed incomes, are increasingly worried about what the future holds for their financial security. Even prominent tech leaders are voicing concerns. Elon Musk, once viewed as a potential ally of the Trump administration due to shared interests in American innovation and manufacturing, has publicly criticized the administration's trade policies. In a notably public feud, Musk described Peter Navarro, Trump's top trade advisor at the time, as someone who, in Musk's blunt assessment, was dumber than a sack of bricks when it came to understanding the complexities of international trade. This outburst occurred after Navarro accused Musk and other manufacturers of merely assembling products from cheap foreign components, thereby contributing, in Navarro's view, to the U.S. trade deficit rather than strengthening domestic industry. This public spat highlights a growing divide, not just between the U.S. and China, but also within the American business community and even within the White House itself, regarding the wisdom and effectiveness of the current tariff strategy. While Trump's core team insists the tariffs are a necessary form of shock therapy required to reset global trade rules in America's favor, many others, including traditional Republican allies in the business and investment communities, remain unconvinced and increasingly worried about the collateral damage. They point out that the U.S. economy, while robust in many aspects, is not immune to global supply chain disruptions, and that these aggressive policies are arguably making it harder, not easier, for many American companies to compete internationally. This tension was fully evident during recent congressional hearings on Capitol Hill. Trade advisors faced intense grilling from both Democratic and Republican lawmakers, revealing significant bipartisan unease about the administration's approach and its potential consequences. Lawmakers questioned whether there was a coherent, comprehensive plan underlying the tariff actions, or if the strategy was largely reactive and improvisational. One senator pointedly asked if the administration had genuinely thought through the full consequences of its actions, particularly the potential for unintended blowback and harm to American industries reliant on imports. Another inquired about the lack of exemptions for industries like textiles, where domestic production capacity is minimal, questioning the logic of imposing tariffs that primarily hurt American consumers and businesses with few domestic alternatives. The response from the administration officials was often blunt. There would be few, if any, exemptions or delays. The tariffs would proceed as scheduled. This inflexible stance has frustrated many lawmakers, especially those representing districts heavily dependent on international trade, who fear severe consequences for small businesses, importers, and their local economies. They worry that the administration may have opened Pandora's box without a clear strategy for managing what comes next. Other critics fear the conflict could spiral out of control. Historically, prolonged and escalating trade disputes have sometimes served as precursors to wider geopolitical confrontations. While few currently believe a direct military conflict between the U.S. and China is imminent, the significant breakdown in trust and communication undeniably raises the stakes and increases the risk of miscalculation on both sides. As Dr. Yu Ji from Chatham House points out, both Washington and Beijing are now managing not only intense economic pressures but also potent nationalist expectations from their domestic audiences. This dynamic makes compromise far more politically difficult, even if leaders on both sides privately wish to avoid further escalation. The trade war is no longer simply a dispute over economic numbers. It has morphed into a test of national resolve and political will. Both sides seem to believe they have too much to lose by backing down and potentially too much to gain, at least politically, by standing firm. In this highly charged environment, finding a path back to stable trade relations becomes increasingly challenging. Trump's supporters maintain he is simply doing what previous leaders failed to do, standing up for American workers, demanding fair trade practices, and challenging China's rise on terms more favorable to the United States. They argue that the shock therapy of tariffs is the only language Beijing understands, and the only way to force structural changes in China's economy, particularly regarding state subsidies, intellectual property protection, and market access. However, critics, including many within the Washington establishment and the international community, worry that this strategy lacks a clear endgame and defined objectives. Congressional hearings have revealed bipartisan concern about the administration's seemingly haphazard approach. Lawmakers from both parties have questioned whether there is a comprehensive plan or if actions are primarily reactive and improvisational. There's a growing fear that the White House has initiated a conflict without fully considering the potential fallout or having a strategy for de-escalation. The fundamental question remains: is the global economic system, established in the post-World War II era, being dismantled, or is it merely being restructured into something new and perhaps more fragmented? Since 1944, the world has largely operated under the Bretton Woods system, anchored by U.S. dollar dominance and generally open global trade principles. However, under President Trump's leadership, there has been a clear and deliberate move away from this established framework, prioritizing bilateral deals and national interests over multilateral cooperation. Trump himself has even suggested potentially weakening the U.S. dollar to boost American exports, a radical departure from decades of established U.S. economic policy favoring a strong dollar. This signifies a potential turning away from the decades-old economic order in favor of what he perceives as a better deal for America, specifically aimed at addressing trade imbalances and protecting domestic industries. For now, the markets continue to watch and react nervously to every tweet, announcement, and retaliatory measure. But beneath the surface fluctuations of market charts and the carefully worded official press releases, a profound power struggle is underway, with massive, long-term implications. This is not just about the economic relationship between the US and China. It affects the entire world. Every new tariff imposed, every significant drop in stock prices, and every retaliatory measure enacted signals another step further into uncharted territory. With both sides digging in their heels, the critical question isn't just what happens next month or next year, but how long this standoff will last, and perhaps more importantly, what kind of global economic landscape will remain when the dust finally settles. In Washington, the Trump administration maintains its stance that these tariffs represent a necessary corrective action. According to former officials who served during Trump's first term, the prevailing view within the administration was that the United States is simply responding forcefully to decades of perceived unfair trade practices by China. These practices, they argue, have systematically undermined American workers, facilitated the theft of valuable intellectual property, and unfairly enabled the rise of a powerful economic competitor. The administration believes that previous approaches, ranging from granting China WTO membership to engaging in endless bilateral dialogues, have failed to produce meaningful or lasting results. Their argument hinges on the belief that shock therapy in the form of substantial tariffs is the only effective means to compel China to undertake fundamental structural changes to its economy, particularly concerning issues like state subsidies to key industries, robust intellectual property protections, and reciprocal market access for American companies. However, critics within the U.S. and internationally worry that this confrontational strategy lacks a clear, achievable endgame. Many fear that the focus on tariffs is a blunt instrument that could inflict significant collateral damage on American consumers, businesses, and the broader global economy, without guarantees of achieving the desired structural reforms in China. From China's perspective, the narrative is vastly different. Chinese leadership views the tariffs not as a corrective measure, but as part of a broader, calculated campaign by the United States to suppress China's inevitable development and maintain American global dominance. This perception is deeply rooted in historical context and is amplified by domestic political considerations. From this viewpoint, the trade conflict transcends mere economics. It is perceived as a matter of national sovereignty, dignity, and resisting external pressure, aimed at hindering China's rightful place on the world stage. This sentiment finds resonance among Chinese scholars and the general public. Dr. Yu Ji, a senior research fellow on China at Chatham House, agrees that the conflict has indeed moved far beyond purely economic considerations. She suggests the trade war has become highly symbolic of a much broader and intensifying geopolitical rivalry between the two powers. For Beijing, she argues, the fight is no longer primarily about negotiating better trade terms. It's about fundamentally resisting what it sees as an American attempt to contain its rise and dictate its economic future. This deeply ingrained perspective makes concessions difficult, as they could be interpreted domestically as weakness or capitulation to foreign pressure. This complex interplay of economic policy, domestic politics, and geopolitical strategy is what makes the current situation so volatile and its outcome so uncertain. Both sides appear locked in a cycle of action and reaction, driven by fundamentally different interpretations of the problem and conflicting visions for the future of the global economic order. As the global economy holds its breath, anxiously awaiting the next move, the decisions made in Washington and Beijing in the coming months will be watched with intense scrutiny. These choices carry profound weight, not just for the immediate economic health of the U.S. and China, but for the stability and structure of international trade and relations for the entire world in the years and decades ahead. The stakes continue to rise with each passing day, and a clear path toward resolution remains elusive. Conclusions. The U.S.-China trade war is far more than a simple economic dispute over tariffs and trade balances. It represents a fundamental clash between two competing economic models, geopolitical visions, and national ambitions. The immediate consequences are already being felt globally through increased costs, market volatility, supply chain disruptions, and heightened economic uncertainty. Businesses and consumers worldwide are caught in the crossfire. Several key takeaways emerge. First, the conflict highlights a potential shift away from the post-World War II era of multilateralism and rules-based global trade, potentially toward a more fragmented system characterized by bilateral deals and heightened national competition. Second, the trade war is deeply intertwined with domestic politics in both the U.S. and China, making compromise politically challenging for leaders on both sides who face nationalist pressures at home. Third, the conflict is forcing a reevaluation of global supply chains, potentially accelerating trends towards regionalization or diversification, although the costs and complexities of such shifts are immense. Fourth, the lack of a clear endgame or off-ramp raises concerns about prolonged instability and the potential for escalation beyond the economic realm. Ultimately, this high-stakes standoff is reshaping the global economic and political landscape in ways that will likely be felt for many years to come, regardless of how the immediate tariff disputes are resolved. The long-term trajectory remains uncertain, dependent on the strategic choices made by leaders in Washington and Beijing. Thank you for joining us on our channel for this analysis. If you found this breakdown informative, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It truly helps us grow and continue producing content like this. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and where you're watching from, so please leave a comment below.